She sat stone still in the debriefing room, her hands folded perfectly, her face unreadable. Around her, the squadron exchanged looks, the kind that aren't spoken but land like punches. Someone muttered it again under their breath, "Robot." And the words slid through the air like a blade. It wasn't her performance they questioned. It was her calm. No nerves, no panic, no breakdowns even in the most intense training runs. That kind of steadiness instead of earning trust made people nervous. Pilots wanted someone who flinched, someone who sweated like they did. She didn't. Not once. That's what got her flagged not for a medal but for a psychological evaluation. They called it a routine review. She knew better. They were trying to figure out what was wrong with her. The thing no one said out loud was that she was simply too good to be trusted. The irony didn't escape her. The thing they feared was the very thing they would later depend on. Because just days after being pulled from active flight, a civilian airliner went down in enemy territory. No warning, no safe options, and no room for mistakes. 12 pilots hesitated. She didn't. While others scrambled to understand what they were seeing, she had already calculated the risks, identified the blind spots, mapped the valley's thermal layers. That mission would go down in history, not because it succeeded, but because of who they had almost left behind. Rebecca Davis didn't grow up around noise. Her world was shaped by early mornings in Montana where the wind whispered more than people did and where the silence wasn't empty. It had rhythm, and to her it always made sense. She was raised by her grandmother, a woman who valued work over words. While other kids learned to talk their way through problems, Rebecca learned to fix things. Engines, clocks, even the busted radio in the barn. If it had a pattern, she could see it. People, though, were different. Messier. Loud. Impossible to predict. At school, teachers often paused after calling her name, waiting for her to respond with something more than a nod. She rarely did. In gym, she ran like she was calculating each step, not chasing anyone. In science class, her calm unnerved the substitute who once accused her of cheating because no one finishes a logic test that fast. She didn't argue. She just quietly handed him her notebook full of handwritten proofs. She wasn't shy. She just didn't see the point in speaking unless there was something worth saying. Her grandmother called it strength. Others called it weird. But Rebecca always preferred wiring circuits over cafeteria tables, and she never needed company to feel complete. What drove her wasn't ambition. It was clarity. Discipline came naturally, not out of fear or pressure, but because order made her feel safe. There was comfort in systems, in knowing that when inputs made sense, outputs followed. That's what drew her to aviation. Not the thrill, but the logic. The sky obeyed physics. And physics, unlike people, didn't care if you smiled or not. She never posted on social media, never sought praise, never joined the gossip threads in flight school. Her instructors said she was professional, precise, and almost unnervingly calm. The other cadets called her the Ice Queen, sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with a shiver. She never corrected them. Underneath it all, Rebecca wasn't cold. She just had different wiring. Where others felt pressure and let it twist them up, she used it to sharpen her vision. Where others chased connection, she built competence. And where others needed to be seen, she just wanted to fly right. Every time. No matter what. Elgin Air Force Base ran like a machine. Everything had a place, a time, a rule. Orders were barked, not asked, and people moved like gears in something much larger than themselves. Pilots there were fast, loud, confident. They clashed in the air and at the bar, bonding through adrenaline and shared pressure. It was a culture built on edge where showing nerves meant you cared and caring meant you could be trusted in combat. Rebecca didn't fit. She followed every rule, met every standard, exceeded every metric, and still made people uneasy. Her silence in meetings, her stillness under stress, the way she looked at a tactical display like she was solving a puzzle, not preparing for a fight. They said she never smiled. They weren't wrong, but it wasn't that she didn't feel anything. She just didn't show it the way they expected. At Elgin, that was almost worse than failure. Her flight scores were flawless. Her reaction times charted off the graphs. But when a bird strike nearly downed her jet and she calmly landed without a flicker of panic, the whispers started. No one said thank you. They said it was creepy. In squad meetings, eyes slid past her. Conversations shifted when she walked in. And when her name came up in private chats, it always ended with the same word. Not wrong, just off. That word lingered longer than any insult. Her bunk was clean. Her gear, perfect. Her record spotless. And yet she spent more dinners alone than anyone else on the base. Not because she pushed people away, because they didn't know what to do with someone who never needed to be seen. The drills were brutal. Heat shimmered off the tarmac, radios barked nonstop, and engines screamed overhead. In that chaos, Rebecca never blinked. She landed 3 seconds faster than the standard. Her maneuvers were clean, tight, nearly clinical. That was the problem. Lieutenant Jackson watched her from across the tarmac and shook his head like someone spotting a glitch in the system. In the locker room, it started as jokes. He'd say things like, "Did someone wind her up today?" or "I swear that girl's got coolant in her veins." At first, others just chuckled, unsure if it was serious. Then it became habit, a way to make sense of something they didn't understand. Rebecca didn't respond. She folded her uniform, logged her stats, and walked out. Not cold, not angry, just uninterested. That made it worse. Jackson needed a reaction. He pushed harder. During one briefing, when she corrected a fuel calculation mid-sentence, Jackson muttered loud enough for the room to hear, "Maybe the robot's glitching again." Nobody laughed. Nobody defended her either. The silence felt heavier than the insult. In simulation training, she beat him every time. Not by force, by efficiency. She used angles he didn't see, patterns he didn't recognize. That made him furious. He threw his helmet once after being eliminated, said he refused to be outflown by something that didn't bleed. Behind her back, the words spread. Not broken, not dangerous, just not one of them. Someone even started calling her drone girl. She heard it once, paused, then kept walking. She never gave them what they wanted. It wasn't that she didn't feel the sting. It was that she didn't trust feelings to solve problems. Every slight, every jab, she filed it away like numbers in a ledger. It wasn't anger that kept her sharp. It was knowing that in their eyes, perfection was the real threat. And she had no intention of becoming less than that just to make them comfortable. The briefing was quick. 2 squads head-to-head in a high-speed dogfight simulation. Jackson grinned as he adjusted his headset, already picturing his win. Rebecca didn't speak. She ran a silent systems check, eyes flicking from screen to radar like she was scanning a language only she understood. When the countdown hit 0, she launched. The fight lasted 6 minutes. Jackson took the high-angle, aggressive and loud, trying to pin her. She never rushed. She let him come, use the terrain, mirrored his heat trail, then vanished off his radar before circling behind. Her first shot clipped his left wing. The second would have been a kill. She ended the run without a single misstep, not even a wasted movement. Command reviewed the footage twice. The room didn't cheer. It sat quiet. Jackson stared at the screen, his jaw set. Someone muttered that it didn't look human. Rebecca stepped back from the console like it meant nothing, like she hadn't just dismantled one of their best. The debrief started stiff. Captain Santis noted her use of thermal drift to mask her jet. "Impressive," he said, but his voice had an edge, like he was unsure if he meant it. Colonel Barrett leaned forward, arms crossed. No smile. He asked if she had flown that scenario before. She shook her head. He asked how she knew Jackson would turn north at the ridge. She said it was pattern recognition. He frowned, called it uncanny, then asked her to wait outside. She stood in the hallway for 13 minutes. No one looked at her on their way out. Later that day, the notice came, scheduled for a full psychological assessment, not because she failed, but because she won too clean, too quiet, too fast. Rebecca's nights were always the same. She cleaned her boots, lined her gear, and wrote a single line in a small black notebook. Not about her day, about the system. What failed, what worked, what she could predict better next time. It wasn't habit. It was how she breathed. Patterns grounded her. Noise never did. The more others talked, the more she listened. She liked order. Silence gave it room to exist. Captain Santis found her once in the simulator bay at midnight. He wasn't there to train. He just watched her fly a sequence over and over with no opponent. When he asked why, she finally answered with something more than a nod. She told him the sky was the only place where everything made sense. In the air, rules held. Gravity stayed. Speed could be calculated. Down there, people asked her to feel things on command. Up here, she just had to solve. He asked if she ever felt afraid. She said fear was noise. And noise got people killed. He didn't understand. But he didn't interrupt again. Her calm wasn't just how she coped. It was how she saw. Where others reacted, she measured. Where others doubted, she observed. Emotion wasn't weakness, but it fogged the system. She wasn't trying to be cold. She was trying to see clearly. She remembered being 9, watching her grandmother stitch a quilt by firelight. The needle moved so quietly, but every thread had a place. When Rebecca asked why she never rushed, her grandmother smiled and said, "Some things only come together in quiet." That was the night she stopped apologizing for being different. Her calm didn't make her less. It made her precise, focused, whole. She didn't want power. She didn't need praise. What she needed was room to be what she was. And when she flew, she felt it. Not applause, not adrenaline, just the clean, perfect rhythm of flight. Rebecca didn't argue when the notice came. She didn't push back or plead. She just nodded, then stayed late in the flight room after everyone left. She started with regulations. Page after page, she studied the language around performance evaluations, psychological fitness, and allowable exceptions for cognitive variance. She found a clause tucked in a new directive. It recognized non-traditional response patterns in high-performance roles, and it had only gone into effect 6 months ago. Her screen glowed through the night. She pulled old case files, anonymous records of pilots who were flagged, reassigned, or quietly discharged. The patterns weren't hard to see. They'd been praised for precision, then penalized for being too quiet, too focused, too off. She printed reports, highlighted inconsistencies, built a timeline. Her notebook became a map of data and outcomes, not rage, not rebellion, just clarity. The numbers made it obvious. By the third night, she started drafting a memo. It wasn't emotional. It was clean, direct. She cited policy outcomes precedent. Then she attached her own flight logs, simulation scores, and commendation history. It read like evidence, not of her worth, but of a system glitch, one that cost the military pilots like her. She filed it through proper channels, not because she believed they would listen, but because systems only corrected when someone forced the logic to fit. It was quiet defiance, a weapon with no explosion, just truth. When Santis saw the stack on her desk, he asked what it was. She told him it was just numbers, but behind her eyes was something sharper, something steadier. She didn't want to win anyone over. She just wanted to be measured by the same scale, and this time she made sure the scale wasn't broken. The alert hit just before dawn. A civilian transport went down near the Damar border. Enemy zone. No time to hesitate. Intel said 247 passengers. No safe route. No ground extraction. Command moved fast. The flight room lit up, voices, sharp hands flying across maps and digital terrain. 12 pilots were called in. Rebecca wasn't one of them. She watched from the edge of the room. Still. Quiet. Listening. The plan was too rushed. The proposed flight path was predictable, and the risk zone covered 80% of the airspace they were trying to enter. Colonel Barrett barked instructions. Jackson stood near the tactical board, already in gear. The same voices that had doubted her now fumbled for a miracle. She waited. Then she stepped forward. Her voice didn't rise. It cut. She pointed to the map, circled the heat ridges, marked an unguarded valley route with a steady hand. She explained the wind patterns, the blind surveillance zones, the time window. No one interrupted. The air was too thin. Barrett glanced at Santis, unsure. Jackson scoffed, called it suicide. Rebecca didn't flinch. She folded her arms, eyes calm but burning. Then she spoke. "You're going to send 12 pilots into a kill zone because you're afraid of what I might do." The silence that followed said everything. It wasn't her plan they doubted. It was her. And now they had to decide if they'd rather lose the mission or trust the one person they'd tried to push out. They gave her the nod with 29 minutes on the clock. Barrett didn't say he trusted her. He just gave a sharp wave and stepped aside when the Inspector General walked in unannounced. That sealed it. Too many eyes on them now. Too much risk if they failed without letting her try. Rebecca took the pointer. The map was still warm from Jackson's hands. She ignored the old plan completely and opened a new overlay. Her voice was quiet, unshaken, like she was reading out a weather report, not rewriting a rescue op on the edge of war. She began with wind direction, then altitude shifts. She layered in satellite gaps and enemy watchtowers showing 3 blind spots that formed a 30-second corridor through hostile airspace. Too narrow, Jackson said. She replied it was enough. Santos asked how she found it. She said pattern recognition. 2 of the spots rotated on a fixed 6-minute schedule. The third glitched every 4th cycle. Together they formed a moving gate, a small one. But if they timed it right, it could work. Her plan called for split formation, 3 decoy flights to the north, the real rescue line flying in low under the radar floor. She mapped their altitude to 5 feet above stall range. It wasn't crazy. It was surgical. No one spoke for 10 seconds. Then Barrett said fine. They'd run it her way. Tension twisted the air. Techs scrambled to reprogram nav settings. Pilots readjusted. The clock ticked louder now. Rebecca didn't move faster. She just kept going, calling out call signs, timing intervals, confirming her numbers with a steadiness that didn't waver once. The squadron watched her differently now, still wary, but listening. She wasn't guessing. She was seeing something they hadn't. And for the first time they realized she might actually be the only one who could pull it off. The sky was a storm of tension as 6 jets roared to life, their engines cutting through the dawn with urgency. Rebecca took her place in the Alpha 6 position, her cockpit alive with screens and sensors, each one a heartbeat she tracked with perfect focus. Around her the squadron moved like a living machine, but she was the mind guiding every pulse. Enemy radar swept the valley below, locking and unlocking in deadly rhythms. Rebecca's voice was calm through the comms, cutting through static and fear. She called out maneuvers with surgical precision, guiding her teammates through a maze of surface-to-air missiles and mobile units. Every instruction was timed to a fraction of a second. She dove low, skimming the treetops as atmospheric distortion hid her from hostile sensors. Her hands danced over the controls, every move calculated, every decision unfolding with fluid grace. When the first missile launched, she anticipated it breaking off with a near-impossible twist that left her pursuers scrambling. Her assault began with a missile strike on the enemy command center deep in the valley. The blast echoed through the comms, but she stayed steady, eyes never leaving her displays. Each strike carved a corridor through the danger, opening a lifeline for the rescue helicopters waiting below. Jackson. Flying Alpha 1 followed her commands with reluctant trust, his earlier hostility replaced by awe. Foster and Williams moved like shadows, covering flanks, drawing enemy fire away. Rebecca's tactical orchestration turned chaos into choreography. The rescue helicopters slipped through the gap she carved, their rotors stirring dust and hope. Enemy forces scrambled, trying to adapt, but Rebecca's mind was faster, recalculating threats before they fully emerged. She neutralized southern batteries with cold efficiency, sacrificing none of her calm, even as explosions lit the valley. Minutes stretched into heartbeats. Each pilot trusted her voice, her judgment, her unshakable focus. When the last helicopter cleared the crash site, she climbed out of the valley, engines roaring in defiance. Barrett's voice crackled through, asking for status. All civilians recovered, no losses. The words hung in the air, heavy with relief and disbelief. For the first time, the squadron didn't see Rebecca as strange or distant. They saw her as the difference between failure and triumph. Her calm wasn't coldness. It was the weapon that saved lives. The debrief room was unlike any Rebecca had ever seen. Officers and pilots sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them. She had shattered every expectation, rewritten the unspoken rules of who could lead and how victory was measured. Those who had doubted her now spoke with quiet regret. Jackson stepped forward first, his voice carrying the weight of genuine apology as he acknowledged the mistake he made, calling her a robot. Others nodded, their eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with respect that had been earned in the skies. The medal ceremony that followed was both formal and deeply emotional. General Hawkins, a figure usually reserved, spoke of transformation, not just in missions but in mindset. She praised Rebecca not only for saving lives but for paving the way for a new era of military aviation where difference wasn't feared but valued. Rebecca stood at attention, the distinguished flying cross pinned to her uniform. She looked out at the crowd, a quiet confidence shining in her eyes. Then she said the words that echoed beyond the room into policy meetings, training sessions, and conversations around the world. Excellence that looks different isn't wrong. It might be evolution. From that day forward, Rebecca wasn't just accepted. She became a symbol, an advocate helping reshape the military to recognize cognitive diversity as a strength, not a liability. The program she inspired grew, bringing in pilots who thought, processed, and flew differently, changing the face of combat aviation forever. She still flew, still maintained her precise routines, but something had shifted. Where once there had been isolation, now there was community. Where there had been fear, there was hope. The calm that had once been misunderstood was now the foundation for something greater. Under the desert stars, Rebecca walked with Santos, the base quiet, but alive with change. They both knew this was just the beginning. The future of aviation wasn't about fitting into old patterns. It was about breaking them, redefining what it meant to be exceptional. And Rebecca Davis was leading the way.